Hi everyone, happy Friday. Before I talk about this record, I want to talk really briefly about the way I found out about this record, which is through the Very Distro catalog. Very Distro being a key distro in the 90s and even through the 2000s for all things hardcore. And I used to read the Very Distro catalog, and it was like if somebody took the best part of Maximum Rock and Roll or any zine, the record reviews, and just made an entire catalog, and that's where I learned about bands like about Starkweather, Overcast, and it was really great. I mean, it was the guy basically describing all the records that he was selling, so kind of like mini reviews, and they were all really, really thoughtful and funny. The founder, unfortunately, passed away, later on, but he certainly made a mark, right? And the record that I, want to talk about is Autumn. Wire Hangers. Autumn was a band from the Philly area in the 90s. They did a demo, they did this 7-inch, they did a CD EP on Crisis Records, which was an imprint of Revelation. I actually had that CD in my Discman when I was doing the 8th grade MCAS. I remember finishing the test, which was of course bullshit, and just listening to that record. But what this is, it might not surprise you if you think about the East Coast in the mid 90s. This is very metal influenced, chugging hardcore. I'm really hesitant to use the E word, emo, because it has such a bad connotation, and rightfully so, but that's for another conversation at another time. But this is really just kind of straightforward, metallic hardcore, and I think it's the sung vocals that might be a deal breaker for some, but I think this is just a fantastic record. I got it at Newbury Comics in Harvard Square, and I was kind of always sort of surprised at the time, like, oh, this is like a 90s hardcore record being sold as new. And what I learned more recently was, I think someone that was involved in releasing the record, I think went and sort of reissued it themselves. And the original Wire Hangers release, which I got only more, later on, is this. And the cover sort of baffles me. It's a kid, I guess, is that a goat? I don't know. And the, I think the picture on the back kind of says a lot. If you kind of were to think about the 90s hardcore look, you could almost slice it into two buckets. You had the kids that were, wearing the basketball jerseys and the baggy pants. And then you had the kids that were wearing turtlenecks and sweaters, and I think this is a really great record. It's certainly a record that I recommend to people that are, into, definitely 90s hardcore, but, 90s hardcore that was, starting to compile different influences. And so this is very much, hardcore that's on the metallic tip, but it has a bit of that influence from, they were, maybe they were listening to Earth Crisis, but they were also listening to, Rites of Spring. And so you kind of have the distillation of those two influences. What I like about the record on the repress is, you got Mr. T there, right? So everyone has a sense of humor. I think this record is really a favorite of mine because when I heard it, I was just like, this is awesome. It was heavy, it was intense, but it had this sort of, other side to it. It didn't just sound like Earth Crisis. It sounded a little different. They would recently re-release these songs and some of the other songs as a 12-inch LP, which I got. But I think these 4 songs are probably the best. They're a band that I like to point people to, this whole idea. And I think they wouldn't have called themselves an emo band. I think they would have called themselves a hardcore band, just like Indian Summer back in the day would have called themselves a punk band, right? I think, emo is sort of a catch-all phrase that's retroactively or retrospectively applied to bands that were just combining different influences. And this record is very much in kind of that East Coast tradition of certainly mid 90s, like kind of chugging metallic hardcore. And there was maybe it was the vocals or the lyrics that were had more of that kind of personal feel. But I think that this is a great record. It comes with an insert, at least the repress for PETA, again showing that there's a political or at least a socially aware component, to these bands and these records. But I always sort of point people to this record when thinking about, emo is not just Indian Summer. It's not just the Promise Ring, or Sunny Day Real Estate. That certainly not My Chemical Romance. It is sort of diverse, and in the '90s there were bands that were doing the open eat chug. That if you listen to this and you're expecting something that sounds like Promise Ring, or something that sounds like Sunny Day Real Estate, or even something that sounds like Indian Summer, you're getting something different here. But this is an all-time favorite of mine. This is one of those records that I was in the basement and I just listened to again and again, and it's a good one. So, peace.